At Thanksgiving dinner with 31 people in my dining room, my son slid a printed invoice across the table and said, in a voice pitched, so everyone could hear it, "Dad, Dad, we've totaled up 14 months of room and board. 1,200 a month. You can set up a payment plan, or you can find somewhere else to live by Christmas." My daughter-in-law didn't even look up from her wine. "We're not running a charity for men who never built anything," she said. 31 people stopped chewing. I didn't raise my voice. I folded my napkin twice, set it beside my plate, and went upstairs to get the suitcase I had packed 9 weeks earlier because I already knew that by Monday morning, every single thing in that house was going to change hands. Before I go on, friend, do me a small kindness. Tell me where you're listening from. Your town, your state, your country. I like knowing who's sitting at the table with me tonight. And a word of honesty up front. This story carries fictional threads woven through it, names and places arranged for the telling. What it has to say to you, though that part I stand behind. I'd been up since 4 that morning. 31 people means 2 birds, and 2 birds means you start in the dark. I brined them Tuesday, the way Marisol used to, with brown sugar and orange peel and more kosher salt than seems reasonable. I made the rolls from scratch because I have made the rolls from scratch every November since 1979, and my hands don't know how to stop. 52 Thanksgivings. Didn't matter whose kitchen I was standing in. That year, I was standing in mine. Nobody at that table knew that part. By 4 in the afternoon, the house was full. Whitney's people had come in from Columbus, a sister, a brother-in-law who sold medical devices, a mother who kept asking where the good glasses were kept. Dennis had invited 3 men from his consulting firm and their wives, which I thought was a strange thing to do on Thanksgiving, but Dennis had gotten strange about Thanksgiving. He'd started calling it a hosting opportunity. I stayed where I've always been comfortable, which is between the stove and the sink with a towel over my shoulder. Nobody introduced me. A young woman asked if we had any more of the cranberry, and I said I'd bring it right out, and she said thank you, the way you thank catering. Dennis was holding court at the head of the table. My chair, if we're being precise, though I hadn't sat in it since the spring of last year. Which is what people don't understand about margin, he was saying, leaning back, glass in hand. You don't inherit margin. You build it. 5 years ago I was renting an office above a dry cleaner in Maumee. Now look around. He swept his arm at the room, the coffered ceiling, the wide plank white oak, the bay window overlooking the ravine, which I'd had put in the summer of 2018, because Marisol had always wanted a window she could sit in with the morning light. Built from nothing, Dennis said. That's what happens when nobody hands you anything. I set the cranberry down at the far end of the table without a sound. My jaw was tight. My 31 people in that room, and not one of them knew that the ground my son was so proud of standing on had been bought and paid for with my hands, and that the deed had never had his name anywhere near it. Then Whitney tapped her glass with a spoon. The room went quiet fast, the way a room does when someone has decided in advance that a moment is going to happen. While everyone's here, she said, and she smiled at me, and I want you to understand that it was a warm smile. That's the part I still turn over at night. It was a genuinely warm, well-practiced, photograph-ready smile. Ray, we've been meaning to talk to you about the arrangement. Dennis put his glass down. It's not a big thing, Dad. It's a fairness thing, Whitney said. Dennis reached beside his plate and picked up a folded piece of paper. 2. He unfolded it, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and slid it across the table toward me, past the gravy boat, past his cousin's water glass, until it stopped in front of the plate I hadn't eaten off of yet. Room and board, he said. 14 months, retroactive. 1,200 a month. There's a payment plan option on the back. Quote, somebody's fork touched a plate and it sounded like a car crash. You eat here, Whitney said gently. You use the utilities. The laundry, the heat alone, Ray. And honestly, she paused, exactly long enough to make sure everyone was still listening. She'd done this before. In front of clients, I imagine, you don't contribute anything. Not financially. Not really. The air in that room changed. I felt it before I could name it. That specific silence that falls when something cruel gets said in a pleasant voice, and 31 people all decide at the same instant to become very interested in their napkins. If your social security doesn't stretch, Dennis said, then maybe it's time to look at something more appropriate. There's a place off Central with a waiting list, so you'd want to start now. He said it kindly. That's what I want you to hear. My son said it kindly, the way you'd tell a man his tire was low. I was 71 years old, standing in my own dining room with a dish towel over my shoulder, and I had to tell myself, not here. Not in front of these people. Not yet. I looked down at the invoice. And that's when something moved in my chest that wasn't anger. It was colder and quieter than anger. It was the feeling of a long argument ending inside you, because up in the top left corner of that piece of paper was a logo. Small, clean, dark green. A wheat stalk bending over the roofline of a house, the stalk and the roof drawn as one continuous line. It was my logo. The logo Marisol drew on the back of a delivery ticket in 1979, sitting in a Ford pickup outside a shuttered feed store in Toledo, Ohio, while I ate a sandwich and told her we were probably going to lose everything. That was the mark of Kowalski Provisions, the company I spent 46 years building from one secondhand deck oven into the operation that supplied bread, rolls, and pastry dough to 211 restaurants across 4 states. The company that owned the truck in the driveway. The company that owned the furniture, the chandelier, the white oak floors, and the deed to the house my son was standing in. My boy had just handed me a bill for rent, printed on my own company's letterhead, in my own company's house, demanding I pay to sleep in a room I owned outright. I picked up the invoice. I read it all the way to the bottom, slowly, because I wanted him to watch me read it. Then, I folded it in half. You're right, I said. I, 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 I. Then I like the same that I said not Esther. I said not Esther's as all the cases. My voice came out level. Nobody ought to live off another man's property without paying for it. I looked at Dennis. Really looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to find a face you remember inside the one in front of you. Starting Monday, I said, every person in this house is going to be doing exactly that. Then I hung the towel on the oven handle, walked upstairs, and shut my door. The invoice stayed on the table, unsigned, next to the good butter. Later, when the cars had gone, and the house had settled into its nighttime sounds, I sat on the edge of the bed in the room they'd given me, the small one over the garage, the one with the window that looks at the neighbor's siding, and I opened the bottom nightstand drawer. Inside was a folder I'd assembled 7 weeks before. The property's assessed market rent, $7,400 a month. What Dennis and Whitney paid the company, $500, listed on the ledger as internal family housing accommodation, a line item I had personally approved in 2021 because I'd thought I was being generous. I heard Whitney's voice again. You don't contribute anything. My throat burned, and I did not let it become anything more than that. I stood up and opened the closet. The suitcase was where I'd put it in September. Everything I needed fit in half of it. A man who's spent 46 years building something learns early what actually matters and what's just furniture. And that's when I noticed the wall. There'd been a photograph hanging there. Marisol and me on the loading dock the day we bought the second oven, 1,984, her in a hairnet, both of us grinning like a couple of fools who'd gotten away with something. It was gone. I found the frame downstairs in the recycling bin by the mudroom door, under a stack of Whitney's shipping boxes. I carried it back upstairs and turned it over. The backing had been pried loose, and the flat green recipe card Marisol had taped inside it years ago, the one she told me was there, the one she said I should go looking for, only when I truly needed it, was gone. My heart didn't sink. It went straight through the floor. Marisol used to say she kept the important things in the places the wrong people would never think to look. Standing there holding an empty frame, I started to understand that my wife had known something I had spent a decade refusing to believe. I sat down on that narrow bed and let my mind go back. The year was 1979. I was 25 and Marisol was 24, and we were both stupid enough to think that wanting a thing badly enough was the same as knowing how to get it. We had $911, which we spent on a used deck oven out of a closed bakery in East Toledo, and we rented a bay in an industrial strip off Hill Avenue that flooded every spring. The first night we slept on flour sacks on the floor because we couldn't cover both the deposit and the rent on our apartment in the same month. Marisol didn't complain. She folded her coat for a pillow, lay down, and said, "Raymond, that oven runs 40 degrees hot on the left side. We haven't turned it on yet," I said. "We will," she said. "Write it on the wall so you don't forget." I wrote it on the wall. It stayed there for 11 years. Our first real order came in March. A Greek diner on Monroe wanted 40 dinner rolls a day, 6 days a week. 40 rolls. I was so proud I could hardly breathe. I was at that oven at 3 in the morning for 11 days straight before I got a bake I'd let out the door. Marisol came in every night after her shift at the hospital laundry, sat on an overturned crate with a ledger she'd borrowed from the library, and taught herself double-entry bookkeeping out of a textbook with a cracked spine. "You're going to ruin that binding," I told her once. "Then I'll tape it," she said, not looking up. "Left column is what comes in, right column is what goes out. Right now, the right column is winning. That changes in about 7 weeks." She ran her finger down a line of figures. 2 more accounts like the diner and we cover the lease. She said it the way other people say it's supposed to clear up by Friday. Matter of fact, already moving on to the next thing. The years stack up the way good work does, slow, quiet, no applause. We bought a proofer. We hired our first employee, a Portuguese woman named Ana Ferreira who was 19 and could tell you the hydration of a dough by pressing it once with 2 fingers. We moved into a real plant on Wentz Road, then a bigger one. Marisol took accounting at the community college on Tuesday and Thursday nights and came home smelling like chalk and vending machine coffee and quizzed herself out loud while I did the dishes. Straight line depreciation on a spiral mixer, she'd call from the table. "No idea," I'd call back. 7 years. 7 years. Learn it. You're getting water on the floor. When Dennis was small, 6, maybe 7, he'd get dropped off at the plant after school and come banging through the flower room door like he owned the place, which, in fairness, he sort of did. He'd climb up on the stool beside the bench and put his chin on the steel. "What are we making?" he'd ask. Every single time, like the answer might have changed. "Rye," I'd say, or brioche, or a batch of croissant dough that would take us 2 days. Rye. He'd watch me fold for a while, then reach out and press the dough with 1 finger, carefully, the way Marisol taught him. "It's warm," he said once, surprised. "It's alive," I told him. "Yeast is a living thing. It's breathing in there." He thought about that a long moment, his nose all scrunched up. "Does it know we're here?" I looked at this small, serious person on a stool in my flower room with dough on his sleeve. "I do. I think it might," I said. Marisol was in the doorway behind us, still in her coat, ledger under her arm. She caught my eye over the top of his head and smiled. Not a big one, just the quiet kind. That means, "Look what we made." I came back to myself sitting on that bed with an empty picture frame in my hands. 46 years. That's what my son had waved his arm across at the dinner table that night. Built from nothing, not knowing he was describing something he had never once touched. My eyes burned. Not from grief exactly. From something older and harder than grief. Now, friend, I want to back up, because it didn't start at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was just the day it came up out of the water, where everyone could see it. Dennis met Whitney Vance in the fall of 2017 at a Chamber of Commerce mixer. He brought her to Sunday dinner 5 weeks later, which told me it was serious before he said a word. She walked in with a good handshake and a better smile, the kind of smile that arrives about half a second ahead of the person wearing it. She asked me questions about the business and listened to the answers with her head tilted, and afterward she remembered details, which impressed me more than it should have. Marisol was already sick by then. She sat at that table and watched Whitney the whole meal and said almost nothing. After they left, she washed the same plate 3 times. She asked what our supply agreements look like. Marisol said finally, "Twice. Different ways. She's interested in what we do. She's interested in what we have." She set the plate down. "There's a difference, Raymond, and you have never once been able to see it." I told her she was tired. I told her Dennis was 36 years old and happy for the first time in years, and who was I to put a shadow across that? Marisol looked at me for a long moment and said, "That's what worries me. You always think love means getting out of the way." She died in April of 2018. Ovarian. 14 months from diagnosis, and she ran the books from a hospital chair for 11 of them. In the fall of 2021, Dennis called and said he was worried about me rattling around by myself. "You seem lonely, Dad," he said. "Come stay with us. There's a whole floor nobody uses. I want to be honest with you about this part, because it's the part I'm actually guilty of." I said yes, because I was lonely. Because the house I'd shared with Marisol had gotten so quiet I'd started leaving the radio on all night. I said yes because my son asked, and my son had not asked me for anything in a long time, and I mistook being needed for being wanted. I moved in. I put the deed to their house in the company's name that same year for estate reasons my attorney recommended, and I never mentioned it, because it never occurred to me that I would need to. The first year I ate dinner with them most nights. The second year they started eating earlier. By the third year, I had a room over the garage and a shelf in the refrigerator with my name on a piece of masking tape. Now, here's where the water started moving. In August, Ana Ferreira called me at home. She'd been with us 41 years by then and ran the night shift, and Ana does not call anyone at home. "Ray," she said, "the Sandusky account. They're being invoiced through a different remit-to address." "Since when?" "April. And the shortage reports out of the secondary plant are wrong. We've written off $11,000 of butter in 6 weeks. Butter, Ray. We've never written off butter. I think." End quote. I sat down on the edge of my bed with the phone against my ear, and the neighbors siding out the window. "Who signs the write-offs?" A pause. "Dennis's operations hire. Whitney's cousin. Brant." I hadn't known Whitney had a cousin working for me. In September, Ana called again. The overnight camera in the loading bay had gone down for the third time in 7 weeks. Always a 2-day window. Always right before the physical inventory count. "How short are we?" "Still counting. But it's consistent, Ray. Same category every time. Bulk butter, bulk chocolate, the specialty flours. The things you can move for cash." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I had already stopped being a man who was hurt and started being a man who was working. "Ana," I said. "Ana, I want 18 months of receiving records cross-referenced against the sign-off sheets. Pull them yourself. Nobody else touches those files." And Ana put a new camera in the bay. "Don't use the vendor we've been using." She was quiet a second. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "Since spring," I said. "Longer, if I'm honest with myself." "What are you going to do?" I looked out at the ravine and the September trees and thought about what had to be moved, what had to be copied, and what had to be locked away before the wrong hands came looking. "I'm going to let them finish," I said. "And then I'm going to be ready." 3 weeks after that, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Traverse City, Michigan, an address that existed under my name alone, 4 hours away, that neither my son nor his wife had any reason to know about. I paid cash for the first 3 months. I told exactly one person. I moved every original document into a safe deposit box at a bank branch on a road Dennis had never driven down. I made copies of the key files, and into each copy I buried one deliberate error, a single transposed digit, different in every version, so that if a document ever surfaced somewhere it shouldn't, I would know precisely which set of hands it had passed through. Then I packed a suitcase, put it in the back of the closet, and waited for Thanksgiving. And 2 nights before Thanksgiving, at 10 minutes after 1 in the morning, I heard something in the hallway. I lay still, papers shifting. Then, a very specific small sound, the shutter click of a phone camera. I got up and opened my door 2 inches. Dennis was standing at the hall table where I keep a dish with my reading glasses, my wallet, and a photocopy of my driver's license I'd made for a form I never got around to mailing. He was holding his phone at an angle to kill the glare, photographing the license. He never heard me. I watched my son for about 3 seconds, and then closed the door without a sound. My heart was going hard. Not from fear, from the particular sickness of having a suspicion confirmed. So, that was Thanksgiving. That was why the suitcase was already packed. And that's how I came to be standing at the end of my own driveway at 9:40 on Thanksgiving night with a bag in my hand, watching a pickup truck idle at the corner with its lights off. Ana had parked half a block down, between a minivan and a landscaping trailer. I knew exactly where she'd be. 41 years of working with somebody teaches you their habits the way a marriage does. She got out, took the bag from my hand without a word, and put it in the bed. I climbed in the passenger side. The cab smelled like cigarettes she'd quit in 1998 and the pine tree hanging off the mirror. "You all right?" she said, pulling out. "I've had better Thanksgivings." "How bad?" "Bad enough that he handed me an invoice in front of 31 people, I said. I watched the holiday lights go by on the storefronts, blinking away at nobody. Printed on our letterhead. Anna's hands closed on the wheel. "He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Neither does she." We drove most of the way to Michigan without talking. That was one of the things I've always valued about Ana Ferreira. He doesn't know. She understands that some hours don't need to be filled. The next morning at 8 o'clock, we sat down in a three-room office on the ninth floor of a building in Toledo with Yusuf Adeyemi, who had been our attorney for 11 years because Marisol chose him, which meant she'd researched him for 2 months, asked him hard questions, and never second-guessed the decision. He was 60, precise the way good lawyers are precise, and he had 3 folders open before we sat down. 3 things are in use, he said. The company card, the vehicle, and the residence. In that order. He turned the first folder toward me. The credit card is the simplest matter in this room. It's a supplemental card issued on your corporate account. As the primary holder, you may cancel it by telephone, today, without notice, without cause, and without recourse to the supplemental holder. Federal law is not ambiguous on this point. Do it today. He made a note. The vehicle is nearly as clean. The Suburban is titled to Kowalski Provisions. Dennis was granted temporary use authorization. I'd like to emphasize temporary, because the word appears in the authorization document 5 separate times. He allowed himself something that was almost a smile. We issue a formal retrieval demand, give him 48 hours to surrender it, and if he does not comply, we send a recovery service with the spare key. When can it go out? Monday, 8 a.m. Then he moved to the third folder, which was considerably thicker than the other 2. The residence is more involved, and it is entirely in your favor. He put on his glasses. I have reviewed the occupancy agreement Dennis signed in 2021, and I have identified 6 separate breaches of its terms. Subletting the lower level for short-term rental without written consent. There are 41 reviews online, Mr. Kowalski, with photographs of your kitchen. Structural modification of the rear office without approval. Use of the property address as the registered business address of an unrelated LLC. Operation of a commercial enterprise on residential premises, failure to maintain renter's insurance, and a fraudulent representation of ownership interest on a credit application filed in June. I sat with that a moment. He told a bank he owned my house. He told a bank he owned your house, Yusuf said. That one is not merely a lease violation. Now, friend, this is the part of the story where I would like to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt like a man reading his son's autopsy. The card was canceled Friday at 2:14 in the afternoon. I learned later, from a cousin who called me because she couldn't stop laughing and then started crying, that it was declined at a furniture store in Perrysburg on a $4,000 sectional, and that Whitney made the clerk run it 3 times. Monday morning, the retrieval notice went out. Wednesday afternoon, a flatbed took the Suburban out of the driveway, while Dennis stood in the yard in his socks. I didn't watch. I was in Michigan, in a rented apartment with excellent heat and no charm at all, sitting at a card table making a list of everything I still didn't know. Because here's the thing I want you to understand. The house and the truck were never the point. Those were the loud things. The quiet thing was still moving underneath, and it was much, much worse. By the second week of December, Anna had the receiving records reconciled. $91,000 in product had left our secondary plant across 14 months, written off as damage and spoilage, signed by Whitney's cousin, countersigned every single time by Dennis. And on December 19th, at 6:40 in the evening, my phone rang, and it was a man I've known since Carter was president, and he told me something that took the floor out from under me. Anna wanted to meet, not at the plant, at a diner in Bowling Green. I got there at 7 and sat in the truck in the lot, and I watched, through the window, my 41-year employee, the woman who had slept in the flower room the night of the 81 ice storm, to keep the proofer temperature up, sit down in a booth, across from my son. I watched Dennis talk for 6 or 7 minutes. I watched him slide a thick envelope across the table. I watched Ana Ferreira pick it up, look at it, and put it inside her coat. My chest didn't tighten. Something structural gave way, like a load-bearing wall cracking down the middle in a house you thought you'd built right. I didn't call anyone. I didn't start the truck. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours and 11 minutes while the windows fogged over. At 11:42, my phone rang. You awake? Anna said. Yes, I need to come over. A pause. Right now, if that's all right. Doors unlocked. She got there 14 minutes later, still in the same coat. She sat down at my kitchen table and put the envelope between us and didn't say anything. I looked at it. I didn't touch it. Open it, she said. It was thick. I had been telling myself for 2 hours that it was cash, and that cash would explain a great deal and make me sick for a very long time. I reached in and pulled out 41 pages, bank statements for an account in the Cayman Islands. wire records, 2 forged signature pages with my name on them. My name, traced, badly. And a photograph of a woman in a red coat standing next to Whitney's cousin at a loading dock in Sandusky. Then Anna reached into her other pocket and set something on the table beside the envelope. A recorder. Matte black, no bigger than a pen. I've been wearing it since the day after Thanksgiving, she said. Every meeting. 9 hours and 40 minutes so far. Ohio's a one-party consent state. Because I'm in the conversation, every second of it is legal, and I asked Mr. Adeyemi before I started. I put my hand flat on the table to keep it still. He came to me in November, she said. He offered me $22,000 to certify a physical inventory count that hasn't happened. He needed a name on it that a bank would believe. Her jaw moved. Mine. He said, Anna, my father trusts you more than he trusts me. She looked me in the eye. He was right, she said. And it made me sick. So I said yes to his money, and then I called your lawyer from the parking lot. I have known men who cried easier than me. It took me a while. Why didn't you tell me? I finally said. Because you'd have gone to him, Anna said. You'd have gone to him and asked him to explain. Because that's what you do, Ray. That's what you've always done. And he'd have burned every record before morning. She pushed the envelope an inch toward me. You raised a boy who counts on people loving him more than they trust their own eyes, she said. I wasn't going to be another one. Now, 2 days before Christmas, I drove down to the old plant on Wenz Road. We hadn't run production out of it since 2009. It holds the archive now, and the original bench, and the first oven, which doesn't work and which I have refused 4 times to scrap. I went because of the recipe card, the one that had been taped inside the picture frame. It had been gone since Thanksgiving. But I had spent a month thinking about what Marisol said, the important things go where the wrong people won't look, and it had finally occurred to me that a woman, that careful, would never keep only one. There was a green metal recipe box on the shelf above the old bench. It had been there for 30 years. It has flour in the hinges. Nobody had opened it since she died, including me, because I couldn't. I opened it that day. Behind the tab marked RYE Sour, there was a small brass key taped to the back of a card in her handwriting. The safe deposit box it opened was at a credit union in Sylvania, opened in 2016, in her name, with mine listed as the survivor. Inside was a spiral notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore, with her name on the inside cover, a manila envelope banded shut, a flash drive in a plastic sleeve, a legal-sized document with a notary seal on the last page, and a torn piece of paper with 4 words on it. Raymond the drive first. M. I drove back to the old plant, because I could not do this anywhere else. I set my laptop on the bench that we bought in 1981, and I plugged it in. One file, dated 2 years before she died. She was sitting on a stool, right where I was standing. The camera was propped against something, the angle a little low and a little off-center, the way it is when nobody's behind it. She was wearing the gray cardigan with the loose button on the left cuff that she kept meaning to fix and never did. Hello, Raymond, she said. I hadn't heard my wife's voice in 7 years. Not once. I'd never been able to make myself play a home video. And there she was, 3 feet from where I was standing, in a room that smelled like everything we'd built, talking to me like no time at all had gone by. I'm going to keep this practical, she said, because you know I get maudlin, and we don't have time for maudlin. She glanced down. She'd written notes. Of course she'd written notes. First, I'm sorry I'm not telling you this to your face. I tried 4 times and lost my nerve, which isn't like me, but this one was hard. I've been thinking about what happens to the company after. Not to us, to the company, to Anna, to the 61 people whose mortgages we're paying every other Friday. And I've been thinking about Dennis. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. He leads with his whole chest, Raymond. He always has. That's the best thing about him, and it's the door somebody's going to walk through. Whoever that person turns out to be will see what he comes from before they ever see who he is. I don't know who it'll be. I may not live to find out, so I talked to Yusuf. I had the operating agreement amended. Her voice went flat and deliberate, the way it always did when she'd already thought a thing all the way through. Any sale, merger, or dissolution of Kowalski provisions requires the written approval of a board of 9 employees with 15 years of service or more, 2/3 majority. It has to convene, and it has to vote. Without that vote, no sale is valid. Not legally, not ever. Not if every share in the company ends up in one person's pocket. If I'm wrong, she said, then none of it costs anybody anything. The company runs the way it's always run. You keep working until you decide to quit, which will be never. She looked directly into the lens, and for one disorienting moment, it was like she was looking at me. But if I'm right, and I'm generally right about the kind of trouble that finds people who have something worth taking, then even if somebody gets every single thing they came for, they still can't do the one thing they actually want to do. They can't sell it. The people who built it get the last word, not them. Then she smiled. That small, satisfied smile she got when a column balanced exactly where she'd said it would. I love you, she said. I love you. Take care of the people. The people are the whole point. The file ended. I sat on a stool in a cold building on Wens Road, and I cried the way a man cries when he's been holding something for a very long time and finally runs out of places to set it down. She'd known. 2 years before any of it happened, my wife had walked a fence line around everything we made together and driven the posts herself. And she'd done it without telling me, because she knew exactly what I would have said. I'd have said she was being paranoid. I'd have said, give the boy a chance. She didn't need me to agree. She only needed me to find this room when the time came. When I could breathe right again, I called Yusuf. Are you all right? He asked. Better than I've been in a while, I said, and I meant it. I need you to schedule a signing. Here, at the Wentz Road plant. Both of them. Tell them, I'm ready to sign the transfer. I, one, I, 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 I. Then I meant it. A pause. Raymond, is this what I believe it is? Schedule it for April 11th, I said. That was the day Marisol died. I think she'd like the timing. I picked that room on purpose, and I didn't explain it to anyone. That's the floor we swept together at the end of every shift for 6 years. That's the wall where I wrote runs 40 degrees hot on the left. If everything we made was going to be settled somewhere, I wanted it settled in the room that knew the truth better than any courthouse does. They came at 10 in the morning. Dennis in a suit that didn't fit him the way it had in the fall. Whitney with a leather folder and her attorney. A young man from Columbus who kept checking his watch. Yusuf laid out the pages. Transfer of the residential property. Assignment of interest. On. The last page, he said, was a signature authorization. Whitney read fast. Dennis didn't read at all. There's a notary requirement, Yusuf said. She'll read the final page aloud. Family tradition. Whitney's attorney frowned. Case. That's not standard. Humor an old man, I said. The notary, who had no stake in any of it, and was simply there to do her job, picked up the last page and started to read. Her voice changed about 5 words in, just slightly. That fractional hesitation of a person whose eyes have gotten ahead of her mouth and found something they weren't expecting. She read it anyway. The final page was not a signature authorization. It was a voluntary disclosure attestation, confirming that Dennis Kowalski and Whitney Vance Kowalski had on this date knowingly presented and attested to the authenticity of every document they had brought into the room, in the presence of the witnesses listed on the attached roster. Mine was the witness signature. The door at the far end of the plant opened. Anna came through first. Then Yusuf's associate with a briefcase already open. Then 2 people in dark coats who moved with the particular efficiency of people who do this for a living, agents out of the Financial Crimes Division, and behind them a forensic accountant who had spent 9 weeks with full commerce, access to every record Dennis and Whitney had submitted in their financing application. Dennis stood up so fast his chair went over backward and hit that concrete floor with a crack that went through the whole building, and he looked at me. For the first time in about 4 years, my son looked at me without calculating anything. No performance, no smooth machinery, and what was underneath it was smaller and plainer than I'd braced for. He was just a man who had lost. Whitney didn't look at him. She was already talking to her attorney in a low, fast, controlled voice, and I understood in that moment that she had a second plan and had probably always had one. I picked up my thermos and walked over to the corner to pour myself more coffee, and behind me the room started in on the loud and complicated business of consequences arriving all at once. The machinery, once it's running, doesn't move fast, but it moves. Whitney was indicted in June. She'd been the architect. The accounts were hers. The cousin was hers. The woman, in the red coat, was hers. At. Her attorney fought it for 9 months, and she took a plea in the spring after that. 5 years. Dennis's attorney negotiated cooperation. He gave them everything. He wasn't clever enough to have hidden much. He got 22 months. I didn't go to a single hearing. I went to the plant, and I ran a bake nobody needed, and I let Anna handle the phone. In August, I signed the restructuring, 55% of Kowalski provisions into an employee trust, governed by the same 9-person board Marisol built, 20% into a training fund for young bakers, in her name. Dennis's portion, nothing. A conditional living stipend upon release, tied to employment, and a schedule for repaying what was taken. No shares, no title, no shortcuts. Anna read the last page twice. She wrote most of this, she said. She wrote all of it, I said. I just signed. He came home in the fall of the following year. I didn't call him. I waited. That's the hardest thing I've ever done, friend. And people ask me how do you hold that for a year and a half without breaking? Here's my honest answer. I didn't hold anything. I'm a bread man. You cannot rush a proof. You can raise the temperature, and you can pray over it, and all you'll get is a loaf that rises fast and collapses in the oven. Time does the work. Heat does the work. Your job is to leave it alone long enough to become what it's going to become. I was leaving him alone to find out who he'd be, with nothing left to stand on. I'm Al. In November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I was at the Wentz Road plant one evening when I heard tires on the gravel, then a knock. Dennis was standing outside with something in a paper sack, wearing a coat I didn't recognize. He'd lost weight. His hands were different, cracked across the knuckles, a burn scar on the inside of the right wrist that I knew the shape of, because I have one, just like it, from the same style of oven. I made something, he said. He set it on the bench and unrolled the bag. It was a loaf, country sourdough, scored once down the middle, the crust darker than most people would go. I've been on nights, at a place in Findlay, he said. 4 months. They let me on the bench in September. He wouldn't look at me. I paid for the flour myself, $6.40. I picked it up. A baker checks the bottom first. It's automatic, the way a musician hears the pitch before the melody. The bake was good. The score had opened. The crust was where it should be, but it was heavy in the hand. He'd underproofed it, and the crumb would be tight and gummy near the center. 20 minutes, maybe 30, would have fixed it. I didn't say that yet. I didn't come to ask what's left for me, Dennis said. His voice broke, once, slightly, like a floorboard giving. I know I don't have the right. I came because this is the first thing I've made with money I actually earned, and I wanted you to have it. He finally looked up. His eyes were bright and spilling over. Even if it's not right, he said. I got a knife off the rack and cut 2 slices. The crumb was exactly what I thought it would be, tight, close, a little damp at the heart. I ate mine standing up. Lest. Sit down, I said. There was one stool. Dennis looked at the floor for a second and then sat down on the planking with his back against the bench and his knees pulled up, exactly the way he used to sit at 7 years old watching me fold dough. Something came loose in my chest that had been tight a long time. You underproofed it, I said. 25 minutes short. I know, he said quietly. I knew when I pulled it. Tomorrow, you'll do it again. He nodded. Once. No argument, no negotiation, no attempt to talk his way into an easier version of what I'd said. I put the kettle on in the little alcove and found 2 cups. The tea was the same brand Marisol kept in that plant for 30 years. I'd restocked it in March without thinking about why. I set 1 cup on the floor beside my son and sat down on the stool. Outside, the November wind came through the bare trees along the service road. Inside, there was nothing but 2 people breathing and the tick of a kettle cooling. Marisol would have known what to say right then. Something short and exactly right, the kind of sentence that settles a room like a hand on your shoulder. I've never had that gift. Bleeder, bleeder, bleeder. So I just sat there with my boy in the room where all of it started, with tea going cold in my hands and a heavy loaf on the bench between us, and I let the quiet be what it was. Not an ending. Not yet a beginning. Just the first still hour after a long storm. Now let me tell you what I actually think, because I've had time. I am not a vengeful man. I never wanted to be one. What I wanted was simple. A son who understood that everything around him had a price, and the price was paid in years, and burns, and 3A. and a woman working a ledger from a hospital chair. What I got, for a long time, was a woman who used my family's trust as a stepladder, and a boy who let her, because he wanted the story more than he wanted the truth. And I made that possible. I want to say that plainly. I loved my son quietly, and I gave without ever teaching. I confused generosity with wisdom, and I have been paying off that confusion in installments ever since. If there's one thing I'd say to any parent listening to me tonight, don't do what I did. Don't let your love turn into a silence your children learn to walk on. Family. Justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts the first time you look at somebody you raised and decide that the truth matters more than their comfort does. I believe the Lord puts certain things in front of us not to punish us, but to show us what we've actually got. That heavy loaf sitting on my bench tonight is who my son is becoming. I don't know yet who he'll be when he's finished, but I'm watching, and for the first time in a long while, I've got hope. Anybody can take back what's theirs. That's the easy half. The hard half is giving something back afterward, even when it costs you, even when nobody would blame you for keeping the door shut. So here's what I want from you, friend, before you go. Some of you are going to tell me I should have cut him off for good. That a man who bills his own father has told you exactly who he is, and you believe him the first time. I understand that. I've sat with it at 2 in the morning. And some of you are going to tell me that no child is finished at 44. And that a door left open is the only thing that ever brought anybody home. Tell me which one you are. And tell me where you're listening from, your town, your state, your country. I read every one of them. If this found something in you tonight, leave a word. Pass it to somebody who needs it. And if you're new here, pull up a chair and stay a while. There's more coming. Thank you for sitting with me all the way to the end. It means more than you know.